All right. So if you're listening, please subscribe. YouTube censoring us. So please, we got to say it. So please subscribe. It's not a lie. So please subscribe so we can get this out to more people. Darius Ross back on talking about every controversial thing in the world, especially in the U.S. But let's start on the housing issue, Darius. We see the mortgage rates are going up and up and up. You've talked about this many times on the program of how there is a crash in sight. And, we see a lot of people homeless now. So what is your verdict right now on these mortgage rates going up? Is it starting to be that Darius Ross is correct and we're in for the start of this, I guess?
Hey, let me say it this way. I'm going to now requote myself as Darius Nostradamus, because now what we're going to see now is the reality of what I've been saying is happening, because the Fed now, as of November, has started peddling back $120 billion per month.
Yeah.
Now the tapering is getting to 95 billion, but now they're including 30-some billion in mortgage-backed securities and then 60 billion in just general money. So the point of it is they're scrambling. So not only the Fed, but just international bankers are doing the same thing. So now here's what the problem is. It's kind of like a bunch of people in a room and they have blinders on. They're all trying to get out the room at the same time, and there's going to be a stampede for the door. So I can guarantee you by at least no later than December of this year, we will be seeing an economic crash of some sort that will probably be unlike any other that we've seen in modern history. Mm-hmm. So with that being said, the real estate markets are going to be affected because people aren't buying. They can't afford it. The global markets are going to take a real crash, and the world economics as we see it now and as we know it now will be in for one hell of a ride. And having said that, the pain is going to be from, say, 2022 through 2025. And America is going to experience a ride that will take us probably for another 10 to 20 years of economic pain.
What's going to happen with the rents? Because we're seeing a lot of these companies buy houses, BlackRock in general, a lot of other private equity companies buying up a lot of these houses. The rents are extremely high all over the country. It's not just in the Northeast now, and in California too, I should say. What's going to happen with that?
Just like what's happening with the commercial property industry, companies like Brookfield, companies like Westfield and so forth, they're abandoning retail properties. So your audience can understand this. If they're abandoning major commercial retail centers like Water Tower Center in Chicago, they just walked away from that and gave it back to the lender. There's a couple of buildings here in New York City. So I can guarantee you rents in this country are starting out to be, for one bedroom, is going to average between $3,000 to $4,000. The average consumer in this country cannot afford, on the average per capita income of $30,000 at max, and that's for a family of 3 or 4, cannot afford that kind of rent. So you're going to be looking at rents that are going to be off the chain. But here's the problem. Those same hedge funds and those same leverage equity groups, the moment that the stock market takes a tank, they're going to bail. And then we're going to have a bunch of houses that will be sitting like we had in the 1980s after Resolution Trust happened. There's going to be a nightmare. So are rents going to be ridiculous? Absolutely. And they're going to be there to stay. We are never going back to the rent of yesteryear. 3,000, 4,000 is going to be the beginning intro to a 1-bedroom or even a studio.
So we're going to medieval times with as far as the class system goes.
There is no class system. Middle class is done, cooked. We only will have 2 classes, wealth and poor.
Yeah.
And poverty is going to be defined as basically below $100,000.
What is going to happen to people that are going to be paying rent, healthcare, the list goes on, gas, food? If they can't afford this, how are the people at the top that, own these businesses going to be able to make money?
Well, the interesting thing about it is now this wonderful thing called buybacks of securities. A lot of companies now have had their executives buy out these securities and stocks and bonds and so forth. So they're getting these huge paychecks, right? They're getting these huge stock buyouts. Okay, so now we have 99.9% of the world is controlled in 1% hands, and the rest of it's poverty. So you can pretty much figure we're going to be looking at a lot of homelessness a lot of medical inequalities because the government's going to be worrying about how to take care of these folks. And last but not least, the senior citizen population, which is 70 some million people just here in America. What we have now, when I look at the economics of it all, the Federal Reserve is tapering its books because they're realizing they're in deep doo-doo. But here's the real problem. The real problem is these 70 million seniors that are retiring every day, 10,000 plus, they're going to be spending less time spending money. And until we look at the alpha generation, 20, 30 years from now, you're going to see a lot of pain because these people cannot afford to exist. They're not spending money because now those that are smart are going to be like, nope, can't do it. Just to eat out these days, 100, 200 bucks for two people, easy.
So we're seeing a lot of these young people that work at Starbucks, Amazon, New York, all over the country in general. They're starting unions. It's good for the country and it's good for the American people, I believe personally too. So what is going to happen with those people now?
The unionization, if you want to call it, of America, once again, is going to be the nightmare for the American worker that has to pay for those same union goods. That's the problem. And I'm pro-union, so I'll put that out there first. But here's the problem, because I go back to the days when it was useful. The problem is now is that if we go back, and I was one of those individuals that fought through my organization, Business for Fair Economy and Business for Economic Wealth. The issue of the IRA is we fought for $15 minimum wage in New York. We got the $15 minimum wage, but what ended up happening, the prices shot up 10 times that. So if you're buying an Amazon product of say $200, it's going to be $290, $300. So the $30 minimum wage is not going to do any good because here the same person that actually makes the $30 can't afford the product, and the person that's on the other end of it can't afford the product. So what will you have? Unions that will be there, but because of automation and AI and robotics, those workers will disappear. So basically, you have a union, but you have very few people in it, and people can't afford the product. So basically, as Jeff Bezos said it best a few years ago, he says, my company might survive another 20 years. He's about right.
That's bad for them.
Absolutely. It's going to be proven to be a nightmare. You can't afford the product, but you've given the worker power. The same thing with McDonald's. What did McDonald's do when we approved the minimum wage in New York? You have to go to a kiosk now and order McDonald's. What does that say? Yes, we have $15 minimum wage, but you have no workers there. What good did that do? I mean, I was so disgusted when I saw it. I'm like, wow, this is a joke.
So you're saying Amazon's going to go out of business then in 20 years? Is that what he's saying?
I'd give Amazon another 20 years, like he's saying. He says he sees his company at that time. This was last year, the interview, guys can check it out. That he did not see his company surviving longer than another 20 years. Now, I may be incorrect about the numbers, but that's what he was basically saying effectively. So it's like a Sears. It has its heyday, then that's it. So he's made his money, so he's good. The workers have the problem.
Okay. I didn't know. I know that interview was out there, but I trust your judgment as far as that.
Type up Bezos talks about Amazon's longevity.
Okay. So we're in a crisis right now, and it's about to get worse. Who do you see, Republican or Democrat, leading us out of this crisis? Because I see zero people.
You're absolutely right. But as I've been saying all the time, Kamala will be the next president. And, as we're laughing at this, and this 10-year hiatus will be based upon her administration. So Ms. Harris will be the next president. I guarantee you.
Does Biden last the rest of the term or no?
No.
Do you think the Hunter Biden issue, which was pushed out in the election and then was told that it was fake news and Russian propaganda, now is being brought back out? Do you believe that this is being brought back out by the Democratic Party to try to push Biden out the door?
I guess in some ways it might be construed that way, but I think it's going to be more a matter of the health issues. Right now, this presidency and the wear and tear on his body is probably going to do more damage than that scandal.
Tucker Carlson came out and said about maybe 5 or 6 days back, said that the Democratic Party put Joe Biden in there because they didn't want Bernie Sanders, and that's 100% correct. So, and now we're getting what we voted for. So, do you think Trump would have been different, whether it's
No.
Russia or? Okay.
No.
I know you're not a Trump guy, neither am I, but we go back to the Russia thing, and I do have my issues that Putin saw the U.S. as weak, and he saw Biden as weak. He saw Trump as more so of an ally. Although, in a way, Trump was harsher on the sanctions, on the pipeline than Biden was.
Well, let's play out a little different game to give you an idea about global politics in the next 20 or 30 years. China will be the master of behind-the-scenes politics and behind-the-scenes control of this modern-day world. And with that will rise the power economic houses of the Africa, East Asia, India, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, and so forth, Indonesia, Malaysia, including South America. So as a result, China will basically have its tentacles, which is smart, into the global phenomenon of the global superpower. America's reign as a superpower will suffer for at least, as I've been saying, about 20 years. At that point in time.
Starting when?
Starting now, going into probably 2025 when we get the harshness of it all with the economic upheaval, and then for another 10 to 15 years thereafter. Wow. We won't see America come back to any sort of economic real vitality before the alpha generation, which is that generation which is born in 2010 range to 2025. And by the time they come to be, it'll be 30 or 40 years from now when they begin to have their financial wherewithal like the boomers. So we're looking at quite a bit of time before this whole thing changes.
So the millennials and Gen Z are screwed, then, is what you're saying.
Absolutely. Because here's the thing, I'm putting it out there right the way it is. We're looking at the economic bomb, if you want to call it. Bad phrase for word, but correct. It will hit between 2022, mid 2025, okay? Lasting between 2035 to 2040, which is, as I said just earlier, when Gen Alpha will begin their ascent to financial bonanza, which is going to be huge because it's going to be somewhere between 4 to 5 billion of them around the world. And their financial bonanza will last between 25 and 30 years. So my prediction of it is, and I probably won't be here to see this, but 25 or 30 years from now, you can expect the Dow to hit 100,000, possibly 500,000, because there are going to be so many of them coming into the market and becoming part of the new financial middle class or upper middle class. They're the largest generation to hit this planet ever with spending and buying. So Alpha Gen, 2011 to 2025, this is what we need to be looking at. They're going to be the major movers and shakers because they're born into a generation of technology. They're born into a generation of Bitcoin, distributed ledger, cryptocurrency, whole 9 yards.
Yeah, but Bitcoin has been having its trouble lately.
Well, they'll finesse it. It'll become a global entity by the time they get to be teenagers.
Is Bitcoin going to be the new currency and we're going to get rid of dollars and cents?
No, but it will be competing with dollars. It will be competing with the ruble and the yuan and so forth.
Okay. So let me shut
So alternative currencies are here to stay.
What other because Mark Zuckerberg started an alternative currency with Facebook, and that thing, went down like a rock.
Because basically what you're looking at is you're going to have thousands of them. They got like 18,000 of them right now. The problem with it is that when they become acceptable, when you just look up cryptocurrency, look up the different varieties of crypto. And
are you involved in crypto personally?
At one point in time I was, but I got out while the getting was good.
Okay.
But because I go back to the days of when this was all started, early 2000. But the point of it is, the point of it is now is that you have to understand that we're going to have a different currency, just like China and Russia are trying to create a different financial system to take us away from the American dollar. You're going to have a lot of different currencies that are going to come about, primarily because of security, privacy, and so forth. I mean, at one point in time, the cryptocurrency was used primarily by illicit and alternative organizations, we'll call it. But now it has become an acceptable factor. It will become more acceptable like the cell phone. We go back to 1983. I worked at First Chicago when the first cell phones were coming about. Now, the cell phone is everything. I remember being on a bus and a train. I had a cell phone. People were wondering where I'm talking to myself. 1983, circa 2003, everybody has one. Same thing with Bitcoin. Right now, it is considered a questionable currency. 20 years from now, it's accepted. Okay. It's a learning curve.
Is that going to happen with Russia, Saudi Arabia, and China?
Absolutely. Not only that, you got Brazil too. So the Russians, the Chinese, and Brazil already have.
Yeah, but Saudis, they have to worry about their defense mechanisms because they have all. Well, they have all U.S. planes, and that's where they're getting all their ammunition, all their weapons.
See, let me give you a little something to think about. The next new superpower is going to be Africa, because here's what's happening there. The United States has one of the biggest drone facilities there in Ethiopia. The United States is now trying to put its fingerprints there to try to thwart the Chinese. So the Middle East is going to become less of an issue, and Africa is going to become more of an area to play in because you got more people.
Correct. And I know you said this before, but we go back to the oil issue. Mm-hmm. And that's Saudi Arabia, Russia, but Russia is more of Europe, not the U.S. But Saudi Arabia is the U.S., and that's where all the oil is. So that's still going to be somewhat relevant.
Yes and no. We have to look at now. You got Nigeria has a huge oil depository.
How about Venezuela?
Yes, absolutely.
Because the Biden administration is trying to make goody two-shoes now with the Venezuelan. Maduro wasn't the president until now he is, and now we need the oil.
And so you're going to see the play there. The major oil powerhouses of the future, and I say that over the next 20 or 30 years, will be Nigeria, Algeria, Egypt, Libya, and Venezuela, and even possibly Brazil.
Okay.
Because it's a huge economy that needs oil.
Do you think there's any chance of the U.S. ever getting off foreign oil and just doing some sort of green issue?
No.
Okay.
No. I mean, there are so many different alternative fuels that are out there. For example, they have one that's CO now, where they can suck the CO from the air and then recreate it to whereas it becomes clean oil or clean gas or clean fuel.
Oh, wow.
But that's like still in development. There's a company that I forgot the name of the company, CO something or another, but they're actually taking CO carbon emissions and actually sucking it back down with a fan back into the factory and then cleaning it up and making it fuel.
Well, I was told nuclear was cleaner now, and there's not those meltdowns like there were in the 70s and the 80s, and it's a lot better for the environment, but we're not seeing a lot of nuclear plants being built.
We're doing well with nuclear power as far as ships are concerned, warships, that is. We're doing well with nuclear power when it comes down to powering various cities and so forth. The use of it now is probably going to get better as the science and technology gets better, but the big thing now is going to be windmills. That is one of the biggest alternative things. You know, you're seeing it everywhere now. I was looking out of a plane and I looked down and I saw these windmills. I'm like, wow, this is like I was a kid.
I don't know. I'm not sold on the windmill stuff. I think it's kind of a joke.
Or even the ocean turbine. That's another one.
Yeah, I'm just maybe the ocean stuff, but I'm not sold on these wind turbines. We have some in the city over here. I think it's kind of a joke, and I don't care about how it looks. I just think personally, unless you're in an area where it's really windy, I don't think it makes a difference. I'm more about, I think the nuclear thing is gold, and I think it's clean, and I think it's just as good as any of these other geothermal or solar and stuff. I think nuclear is just as good. And I think we need to start looking into that. They don't want cold. I agree with that. Let's get rid of cold, but let's push, money on the nuclear issue.
See, the problem with that is the geopolitical structure of that, because now the problem becomes once certain countries that have made folks really uncomfortable, right, with nuclear power, then it becomes nuclear power becomes nuclear weapons. So the world, or we'll say it this way, the United States is not quite comfortable with certain entities having access to nuclear power, because nuclear power also means plutonium, also means uranium, also means nuclear weapons. So
Okay.
that becomes the issue now. That's a question mark. And I'm all for what you're saying. I agree with it. But because of the fact of how our country's foreign policy has been when it came down to nuclear weapons, that will prevent the world from being what it needs to be when it comes down to nuclear power.
Well, then we have Biden going out there and calling Putin a war criminal. Whether he is or not, so was George W. Bush. You know what I mean? And so was a lot of other presidents too were war criminals. But, he's going out there and, this is a very unstable world right now that we're in, especially with coronavirus and with the Russian issue. And he's trying to even get it more unstable. And, I was giving him credit because he was against and he still is, I'm pretty sure, against having that no-fly zone. But then he goes on and starts saying Putin's a war criminal. We got to get them out of the UN and all this other stuff. I think this is a disaster.
See, the big problem with the Ukraine is this. The Ukraine was part of the former USSR.
Right.
And the problem with that right now is if you're going to turn around and arm a foreign power, and then you're going to say, okay, here are the weapons, you're on your own. That's the problem. You're going to have to engage in that fight. So if you don't want to engage in that fight, then you're going to have to turn around and say, do I provide you weapons? So basically you gave a sword to a gunfight. That was a mistake.
Well, China obviously doesn't want a nuclear war, just so why are they not stepping up, or do you believe they are behind the scenes and making sure that Putin doesn't do anything crazy?
Well, it has been an understanding that, quiet as it's kept, an understanding that this is going to be resolved. And it's going to be resolved basically by Russia ultimately taking over the Ukraine.
Correct.
But the bottom line of it is that if you want to look at smoke and mirrors, right, you're actually putting a situation in place where all of these people have perished based upon schematics, because had you stayed out of it, then this would have either been one and done, or this would have been messy and uncomfortable, and it would have been handled a little differently. Now you've actually stepped in and said, okay, I'm going to provide billions upon billions of dollars to provide you the ability to fight, but you provided a no-fly zone, nothing. So you should have said, okay, if I'm going to provide you weapons, I'm going to get in there and get in the battle, but you also know what's going to happen. So you have now 2 nuclear powers that would step in. Now you have 3 nuclear powers all at each other's throats. So the bottom line of that was that should have been either A, stay out of it, or B, engage fully. You can't do both. I mean, Colin Powell said it back in the day, if you break it, you own it. Now the United States has broken it. Now you own it. So whatever happens going forward, we are going to have to be responsible and accept the consequences of what happens next.
Yeah, you think Biden's really running this country?
At this stage in the game, unfortunately speaking, whatever is done next is going to be messy, because the U.S. economy is now at stake. Now you have the global economy at stake, because here's the thing about sanctions, right? Let's deal with this from a militaristic background and also from political background. The world is interconnected. So we have counterparty risk, as they call it in the financial business. Every time you make a decision, it's going to affect somebody else. And every time that decision is made, it creates another problem. So in that counterparty risk, what has happened now is a domino effect. Okay, you're taking over these ships for these Russians, and you're taking this, and you're doing this, and you're doing this, and you're taking sanction, whatever else. But you're creating your own worst nightmare, the wheat. The United States needs the wheat. They sell it to somebody else. Okay, then you don't get it. Okay, you don't have the chickens. You don't have the this. You don't have the ability to get, for example, something as simple as Levi jeans. They're not made in America. They're made someplace else. You get some other, ships and cars. They're made someplace else. We had the ports here where the logistics were all messed up. Nobody's realizing just how complicated the world has become. The world has become smaller, but more counterparty activated. We need each other, basically.
Globalization fucked up the world in plain English.
Yes. But it was a good thing. Let me get it right. It was a good thing. It made some problems because the politicians didn't do it right. They made the world smaller and connected, but they didn't understand. Once you become smaller and connected, you have to cooperate. So now we have a lack of cooperation. So cutting Mr. Putin off by Mr. Biden doesn't really do anything for U.S. citizens. Let's look at the oil prices. Let's look at the price of food. Let's look at the price of commodities. We're off the chain now. You didn't really do any good.
I was told we didn't get a lot of oil from Russia, though.
No, but the problem with that is we're still looking at the after effects of what happens, because here again, If you turn around and look at who owns the US dollars, right? The dollars are owned by foreign powers, okay?
Yeah.
If you don't own your own money, then how are you going to play the game? So, for example, if China owns the US dollars, okay, everyone says, well, China can't turn around and do anything to affect the US dollars. But what you have to worry about is that when they start dumping dollars at the first sign of a break in the system, what does the US economy do? Tanks.
Tanks. Yeah.
So the same thing with the Russian economy. If the United States is saying they're affecting the Russian economy, yes, it affects the Russian economy. But let's look at how much trade happens with the US and Russia over the years. They're buying stuff here in the States, real estate businesses, real estate opportunities, businesses, and so forth. Nobody gets the fact that billions upon billions of dollars are coming from these various despots and so forth. So this is economic for somebody. Some people are living off the economics of this.
Well, we're hurting the Russian people more so than we are hurting the oligarchs in Russia. And that's the problem with the sanctions. Just like we saw the sanctions in Venezuela, the sanctions are hurting the Venezuelan people, not the people that are the oligarchs and the rich people of the country. And that's the problem. And that's how terrorism starts. And, you know, and you start wars in different countries and you have sanctions and stuff. And that's why people hate you. And that's how you get 9/11 and all these other things happening. So, I mean, it's kind of common sense for people that have a little bit of intelligence. But unfortunately, there's a lot of greed and people don't give a shit. And that's the way the cookie crumbles.
Well, let's go a step further, something very simple. A oligarch member buys a $53 million condominium here in New York. That's a cash purchase, right? Where does that money end up at also? That money ends up at mortgage companies. It ends up in banks. It ends up being loaned out elsewhere. In the same token, a member buys a New York City basketball team. That's employing and hiring people. Okay, so that person gets thrown out or his money gets confiscated. So those people are then affected. Nobody gets this counterparty risk. Every time you do one thing, you affect another part of the chain. The world is no longer independent. It's a chain now. The chain reaction begins to start happening and slows everything down.
I was just saying you more so you want the Russian people on your side, but if you're screwing them, then you can't say like Putin's a bad guy. We're trying to be the good guys. And then you have all these sanctions that are screwing all these people.
Same thing there. For example, you look at Italy. Okay, you confiscated those boats. But guess what? There were cleaners on those boats. There were people that were working on those boats. There were boat craftsmen, leather craftsmen. There were people that were working on various, optical parts of the boat, the navigational system. Nobody gets that these people are still common people that are working. So you're still affecting an economy.
DariusAross.com. Definitely check it out, Darius. It's always a pleasure.
Absolutely. Be good, Rob. Take care.